Thank you so much for attending the live studio visit hosted by Artfare. This week in our Thursday slots, we have Johannah Herr. I'm really excited. My name is Karen. I'm the curator at Artfare. Johannah has I'm just admitting people here. People are still coming in here.
Hi.
Hey. Yes, so we have a wonderful artist today that I'm really proud to know well. Johannah, just a little bio and background, graduated from Parsons with her BFA and then went to Cranbrook. Anyway, she's teaching at the Steinhardt School right now. She's teaching at Parsons. She's really a wonderful activist for young women in preventing sex trafficking in Thailand called Daughters Rising. It's a really fantastic way to advocate for the marginalized. To many residencies in Iceland, and she's run Fulbrights in Mongolia, Vermont Studio Center, Wasaic, shout out, all sorts of really fantastic experiences. So, she's got a lot of worldly understanding, and her work is profoundly colorful and conceptual, thoughtful, and we're so excited to have her on the platform and to have her here today to discuss her work. And really it is a treat to hear a little bit more about the work that she's working on right now in her studio. And from Brooklyn, New York, without further ado, we have Johannah Herr.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Carolina. Carolina is a very, very dear friend of mine, and we have known each other. I'm very fortunate to have her in my life now for a couple of years since I've been back in New York. So I'm really excited. She's helped me so much with curating my work into shows and just giving me career advice and being a mentor. So I'm really excited to have you as the person interviewing or studio visiting with me today.
Thanks, Johannah.
We're going to try this technology thing. So we're navigating two cameras, just to be clear. So I'm going to try to look at both of them. And I have my lovely husband, Franklin, who's behind the camera. There's his hand, yeah. Anyways, so behind me, I guess we'll just start with this sort of the new body of work that I'm working on. And then we can kind of talk about some other stuff. And then I want to definitely get into talking about the collaboration work that I've been doing with Frank for a couple of years now. So behind me is this textile piece. So it's all machine-tufted, see here, rug. And the imagery on it is I should start to say the series of works itself are called American War Rugs. And the idea behind them is that, I don't know if everyone is familiar with war rugs in general, but I can show you an actual one, which I have in my studio. So these are objects, this one is from the late 80s, and they're traditional rugs. Can you see that? They're traditional rugs made in Afghanistan. And starting in 1979 with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, they started incorporating weaponry into their motifs. So I'll give you a close-up. The top of this rug, the motif, it's grenades. You can see AK-47s, tanks. So I've been really interested in these as objects for a couple of years now. I ended up acquiring this one on Sears.com, which is where I bought it, which is insane. But I was thinking about them sort of as an object and the idea of incorporating kind of the peripheral sort of objects of trauma that happened through warfare into a domestic object. And what that means to have to deal with those kind of sort of weapons of war on a daily basis all around you. And I was thinking about that and how that might relate to if we as Americans, particularly I think about this in terms of like mainstream sort of white suburban America, particularly, who's often insulated from a lot of different violences that we have in the US. I think about like, what would it look like if we had to deal with our own kind of violences that are happening sanctioned by the state on a daily basis in our living rooms. So I started this project, and it's kind of an ongoing textile project. This one in particular, the iconography on it is all surrounding the immigration detention centers. So, well, this is upside down right now, but let's see here. So these are the sort of images from the tent city, the kind of like prison complex, the tent prisons that have been repurposed for detention centers, Walmart logos, so using Walmarts as detention centers. We'll go down a little lower. So this is the underside of a highway, so that also those areas were used for detention centers. Backpacks, these are all broken water bottles. So there were a bunch of videos that surfaced of water bottles that were left in the desert by NGOs for migrants that were being sabotaged by Border Patrol officers. And sort of cacti. Thermometer, so a lot of the detention centers are called heleras, which are freezers because they keep them at such cold temperatures. Let's see here. Well, this is upside down, but they bear obviously the sort of demographic of immigrant and refugees being children and the family separation policy. And then the last image I'll show you is, so this is actually the design of a combo water fountain and toilet that they use a lot in prisons, and they have them in the detention centers. And when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez visited one of the detention centers, this sort of top part was broken, and the detention guards just instructed women in the cells to drink out of the toilet bowl. So, oh, and then you have sort of ICE and Border Patrol bulletproof vests, so like the incrementalization of the border, both along the border and sort of in all of our cities.
Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you make these? Are you doing, when I was younger, I used to have, the self carpet kit with the eye and the hook and, already patterned out for me, and I knew what color I had to put down, but this seems very laborious. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I design all of it first in Illustrator. So I use a lot of digital design programs just because they're super fast to be able to, mock things up, change colors, that and then, so what this is hanging on is actually a tufting frame that Frank built for me. Thank you, Frank. It's the edges here, this is protective foam, but it's all nails. You can see that a little bit. And so basically I stretch the rug substrate, which is a kind of, it's hard to tell here. It's like a woven kind of a canvas. So I stretch it across the frame, and then I use a tufting gun that looks like this to shoot the fibers through. So it's basically the exact same process as like your like the latch hook rugs that you'd be doing, but it's mechanized. So yeah, so it's a lot faster, but it's still like for something that's at this scale, it's still pretty laborious. Like it takes quite a long time. And so then once you do that, you go through and you can kind of trim it, and then you put like an archival PVC glue on the back to keep all the fibers in place.
Do you intend for these, you've done this carpet, perhaps you've done more. I'm interested in what other topics you might be covering, but also, are they intended for the wall or are they intended for the floor?
Yeah, so I'll show you one that I finished, and then I'll tell you ones that are in the works. So I have one over here that is dealing with our kind of mass incarceration in the States, and sort of all different aspects of the kind of exploitation that happens through our prison system. So thinking about bail bonds, so you have like I'll show you down here, like neon signs, and sort of how they disproportionately disenfranchise lower income folks. So you have money. These are target signs for shooting range. So thinking about, so Unicor is the biggest for-profit prison industry that basically uses slave labor through the prison system to create things like target signs for the police to use in their training, and a lot of other objects that are used by the judicial system or the police themselves. So it has this kind of cyclical sort of like using prisoners for labor and then having them make objects that are then used to imprison them. It's so this one sort of deals with a lot of different sort of aspects of the sort of exploitative system that people who, like myself, who are interested in like abolishing prisons, you know, think about when we think about the prison system. So like voting rights, sort of the legacy of how it relates to slavery, and it sort of comes directly out of slavery. So this is one that I'm working on that's finished for now. Then I'm currently working on two that, currently working on two that will be about mass shootings in the past particularly in the past 5 years, and thinking about how kind of gun laws or the lack of sort of gun regulation impacts sort of that as an avenue for violence on a mass scale and sort of domestic terrorism.
These topics are they're very political and often, you know, very contested. Some of the strong viewpoints that you have in relationship to the perception of a lot of, you know, the federal response to whether it's immigration or the prison industrial complex or mass shootings. However, my question would be, these are unique objects. Would you ever consider, since you do work in textiles, would you ever consider mass production of such things?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, the idea of American War Rugs is a kind of speculative proposition for how we might, on a mass scale, deal with these violences in our, like, sort of reckon or even like exercise with an O, exercise, ourselves from this sort of violent history that is, you know, continues to this day. So I think on one hand, it makes sense in that sort of speculative proposition to mass produce them so that it's able to get kind of to a wide audience and have that kind of like having to deal with it in your everyday life. But it's always complicated because then it's like the fetishizing of the consumable object ends up sort of, you know, adding to the kind of already sort of like deeply problematic subject matter. And I think that's always sort of a complication, I think, when you're doing any kind of artwork in general, but then also political artwork or even objects that are used in activism. You know, if you're, you know, having a shirt that maybe has a slogan on it that like protests your politics, there's, I don't know, it's complicated, the mass. So I'm not sure, I guess would be this best way to answer.
It's a hard question. I just thought, you know, so many, your palette is so bright and inviting, yet the content is really thought-provoking and also affronting. It's one of the things that I really value about your work. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of this idea of propaganda and some of the works on paper that we also have on Artfare.
Yeah. So let's see, I have 3 of these pieces that are on Artfare right now. So this piece, it might be backlit too much for you to see it. Sorry, Frank, I'm gonna go. Okay, you can see it a little bit here. So these are works on paper. I have a little bit easier to see. So they are what I call propaganda posters. So the text on them, I'm going to actually try to maybe hold it up, it'll be easier. I kind of at the beginning of the Trump administration, one of my friends posted on Facebook about, they posted a Joseph Goebbels quote, who's the head of propaganda for the Nazis, on Facebook, and was just saying like, oh, this seems so relevant to our contemporary politics. And I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is like so jarringly accurate for how, you know, this, like these new sort of alternative facts and like fake news and like all this sort of conversations. So anyways, so I started doing these works on paper that are Joseph Goebbels quotes, but they're actually done with all hand-cut vinyl and gouache. So I'll give you like a very, and they're all sort of metallic, shiny. But I got into like different, like playing around with legibility and kind of making text legible or illegible depending on where the viewer stands. So for these ones in particular, when you are sort of in the straight on position, such as this, they're kind of like completely illegible. But when you are at a kind of oblique angle, I don't know if it's gonna work with the camera, but in person it works a lot better. But at a kind of oblique angle from the side, you're able to read them perfectly. And so I thought about that oblique angle as a kind of metaphor for any sort of marginality, that when you're in a sort of dominant position, that you're unable to understand how power structures work, right? So it's like if you are in a kind of male or white or, you know, any of these sort of privileges, like it's harder to see from the other side, like, you know, how these structures work. But from the oblique angle of any kind of marginality, the power structure is clear. So this one in particular says, truth is the greatest enemy of the state. And again, Joseph Goebbels quote. And then this one says, arguments must be crude, clear, and forcible, appeal to emotions and instincts, not intellect. And a couple other ones, one of them says, propaganda must facilitate the displacement of aggression by specifying the targets for hatred. So, yeah.
There are a lot of quotes, and you using text in your work. It certainly is one of the bodies of work that you've been with the works on paper, and you have so many of those in different sizes, and they've been pretty popular, which I'm happy to say, in the flat files and so on and so forth. The back to kind of this understanding of marginality and it's like understanding working with that privilege. I think that's a nice segue to talk a little bit about the Frank Freedom work.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna try to navigate this now with both Frank and I. So we'll see how that goes. Does this work?
Who knows?
Okay, so let's just like put it on the poster. So okay, this wall of posters here, they're all mirrored. Okay, so they're totally impossible to photograph or to video because it's a mirrored surface. And they're sort of printed on vinyl. But here, we'll back away a little bit. Basically, Frank and I, this is sort of an ongoing project, but we're working on it mostly in 2018, so we've sort of taken a little bit of a break. But it uses professional wrestling as a vessel to talk about state-sanctioned violence. So all of my work kind of interrogates state-sanctioned violence in America in some capacity or another. And so we had been talking a lot about theater and the circus and different ways of kind of grabbing the attention of a crowd. Frank was doing a bunch of research on, what was it, like traveling circuses?
Definitely like traveling circuses in like the 19th, 20th century. And the ways that they would try to use gimmicks or game machines to manipulate people, manipulate them for additional compensation out of any of their transactions throughout the circus. And so like things like magic and the throwing the ball or shooting the duck, those were all great. Those were all like great ways to find marks. And a mark was somebody that they would literally put a piece of chalk on them on their shoulder or somewhere that would identify them as being somebody who was easy to get money out of. And a lot of that terminology and aspect and stuff was found its way into professional wrestling in the beginning of the 20th century. And the matches were in the traveling circus and fair loops, and eventually led to be intimidating or like emulating actual sport. And a lot of the different aspects that they would use in that culture turned very performative. And the performance of that in the late 20th century became just an easy way for them to do simple storytelling. And so, we got a lot of interest in it from that standpoint. And
well, we were thinking like that sort of simplistic storytelling and that kind of way of immediately kind of manipulating a crowd or doing kind of a bait and switch with people. We thought that was a really interesting and apt vessel to talk about how ideology works in general. And specifically now with kind of, like Trump was actually on the WWF or E or WWE, like sort of the state of the kind of theatrics because media stations have so much competition. Anyways, so we decided to use Frank Freedom. I don't know if you can see some of the text here, but this character Frank Freedom that we created, played by Frank, that's a sort of professional wrestling character that's the embodiment of American ideology. And so each of these posters is Frank Freedom versus the theme, and the theme corresponds to different aspects of state-sanctioned violence throughout the history of the US, as if they were wrestling matches. So it has all these kind of supporting matches that are actual events. So for example, let's see, what's a good one? You wanna do that one? Okay, so this is Frank Freedom versus Due Process of Law. You can see that one up there. And it has, and all of the wrestling matches are themed with actual themes present in professional wrestling. So this one is a barbed wire steel cage match, and it's Japanese Americans versus Executive Order 9066. So that's Japanese internment. You have, let's see, Falls Count Anywhere match, U.S. black sites and extraordinary rendition versus enemy combatants. So the idea of sort of the creating black sites so that we could torture people outside of the states. See here, this one is Frank Freedom versus Terror. You have like matches like SEAL Team 6 versus Osama bin Laden in a body bag match. And again, the type of matches, so like a body bag match is an actual name of a match in professional wrestling that we're just sort of metaphorically connecting. So yeah. Oh, and the other part of this project is that there's a term in professional wrestling called kayfabe. And kayfabe is the continuation of the theatrical narrative, both in front of the public and behind closed doors. So in like the late 80s, early 90s, if you would be a professional wrestler that was on tour and you're a heel, so you're a bad guy, and you're the baby face, you guys wouldn't even be able to share a wrestling dressing room because you hate each other, right? It's this like continuation, even behind closed doors, of these narratives. It doesn't really happen so much anymore, but we thought that was a really perfect vessel to talk about that as how the American dream works, that like we kind of understand that it is not a real thing, or at least it's widely needed, kind of all buoyed up by sort of a collective belief, or buying into this sort of as an ideological premise. So anyway, so we thought that was also like an important connection with professional wrestling that seemed like a good way of talking about these things.
And the works on paper are all hand cut, and you know, they too require a lot of time and careful hands, very well crafted. These Frank Freedom posters, they're printed on vinyl, or like, can you talk just a little bit about how you made that? And aren't they? They're editioned, correct?
They're editioned. Yeah. So this is printed vinyl, clear vinyl that's adhered to. Well, this one's dye bond. These two are dye bond. Like these are APs and these are the edition. But dye bond is basically, what would you say? It's like, it's not
It's an
acrylic.
exterior grade aluminum that's been finished. So the mirror finish is applied afterwards. And it has like a foam core, a dense foam core, and it's an exterior grade permanent product, but you get a really decent mirror effect with it, and it's easy to apply, something like the clear vinyl for the printing.
Yeah.
So
they're mirrors, they're just not actual mirror, if that makes sense. They're glass, like it's not glass, it's this special other material.
Yeah, and the mirror is on the face of the material so that there's not as much depth or pop to blur out. So if you notice in the proofs, if you get off to the side, you get this double line. That's because the thickness of the mirror is clear glass and then mirror on the backing, where the dye bond is mirror on the face.
That might just be nerdy and boring, Frank.
Yeah, but you have
anyway, fabrication, nerdy stuff.
Well, the fabrication is, you know, the process of the fabrication, I think, is really nice for folks to learn about. The thing I was questioning too was the mirror. Why did you choose this dye bond with a reflective surface in relation to the body of this work?
Yeah, I'm glad that you are asking that. So when we were collaborating and like talking about this work, we thought it was really important not to necessarily have, like, it's really easy to make Frank Freedom be a bad guy because he's like a Trump supporter or something like that, you know? It's like really low-hanging fruit. But we were more interested, instead of it being specifically partisan, to talk about how like we all participate in systems of oppression, either tacitly or directly. And so we wanted, regardless of like where our politics are, we still participate in them as part of the society. So we wanted the mirror was really important because it's kind of a, you know, like literal metaphor of us, like you having to deal with yourself in this history of violences throughout the states.
And during the performance, we
we did it. You should explain the performance.
Well, during the performance, we had basically made it so that the interior of a space was a wrestling ring, and that you had to enter the wrestling ring to be able to see any of the posters.
Yeah.
And once I did the performance, it came out in costume, and
there's lots of sparkly spandex involved and fringe.
But I basically chastised the people that were there and let them know that they were participants in the work, that they had to, that they were my opponents for the evening. And just about everybody's trying to squeal their way out of the wrestling ring around that time. But it was a really good time to introduce people as participants in the work. The mirror made them a participant in the poster. Yeah. They had to see themselves in the text that they were reading. And when they were in the wrestling ring, they had to see themselves as a part of the combat. And that was our way to draw people and to let them know that they have some type of participation in all of these things on the wall. And whether it's inaction or complacency with those things having happened, that is your participation in the acts that are wrong in the world, in the United States violence. So.
Yeah, this is one of the first bodies of work that I, since I'd been doing studio visits with you or known your work, that had that active component of performance. Have you thought about pursuing more performance-based work around some of these propaganda posters or very strongly politicized you know, works that you're making?
Frank's the performer. I'm nervous even being on this camera right now in front of everyone. So yeah. If he is doing it, then yes.
Well, you're active in so many ways, and with both having faculty positions in different colleges in New York, as well as the amount of time you spend in Thailand. I'm curious about, I know you've been inside your studio a lot the last month, and you've been making these tufted rugs and other things. Are there any other little things you've got lying around that you can show us?
Yeah. Okay. So this is like, it's a couple of things going on. So, in one sense, as kind of a way of staying sane in quarantine, I was trying to like learn some new skills that I probably wouldn't allow myself the time to do. So I just started doing these little paper weavings that are just super simple, like strips of paper woven together. And I wasn't sure like what they would kind of amount to, if anything. But I finally figured it out. So they're kind of addictive. I did a ton of them. But what I would like to do is I would like to start incorporating text into them in the same way as the propaganda posters. So playing with the weaving patterns, with the sort of legibility or illegibility of the text, and specifically having text that kind of is thematically addressing kind of health disparities and health inequity, particularly around COVID-19. And that part of it is important because so I have, as you mentioned, I have a nonprofit. Oh, yeah, closer to that one. I have a nonprofit that I started 8 years ago now in Thailand, and we are an anti-human trafficking initiative where we work with a lot of mostly stateless, a lot of Burmese refugees, but all ethnic minority women. And because of COVID-19, our entire program is kind of in jeopardy. So one of our main project is a hotel called the Chile Orchid, which is kind of just like a magical hotel in the jungle that's also an elephant rescue. So that's like a whole other crazy thing. But everyone who works for us is part of our vocational training program. So they're all at-risk ethnic minority women, some of which are refugees, some of which are from Thailand. And we pay them to like learn the hospitality industry. So our fate, as far as all of our other programming, so the biggest thing we do is we give scholarships to ethnic minority women for secondary education. So right now we have, I think, 20 people that are sort of in our educational program overall, but we have about 10 people in university right now. So all of those programs are tied to the funds that we get through our hotel. And because of COVID-19, there's no tourists in Thailand. And the crazy thing, I mean, we're all kind of facing this in different ways and precarities. And it's sort of, I think the biggest thing is like, coronavirus is just sort of illuminating all of the inequity that's already in our society. So, it's impacting more marginalized people sort of quicker and in deeper ways than other folks. So anyways, basically, because we have no tourists and no money coming in through that project, we are at risk of having to stop our scholarship program, which is totally devastating and in some sense like unfathomable. I've been collaborating with some of the women who are our students, and they're just like all in like totally brilliant, like amazing women. And so anyways, long way around is to say that I'm starting an online art auction where a lot of friends of mine who are artists have generously donated artworks to us. And so we're gonna auction them online, and then all of the proceeds from that will go to the scholarship program. So I have these little woven babies that I'm going to do I want to do a sort of a broad range of prices for the work so that it can kind of be an expansive collector base. So it's not going to be works that's like thousands and thousands of dollars with some smaller things. So these are going to be sort of testers for some text-based little weaving pieces that I'm going to include in the auction that I'm going to hopefully be launching in the next 2 weeks. So
one of the things I really value about your work and your dedication to your work is, you know, you're not just out there, you know, talking about these really hard topics of marginalization, violence. You're part of a 501c3 organization that is really putting your money where your mouth is. And it's one of the things I value so much. And I wonder, can you remind me, how long have you been doing Daughters Rising?
2011.
Okay.
8
Wow.
years, 9 years. I don't do that anymore. I don't
It's okay. Yeah, it's just that's one thing that I really I love to know behind all of this, and whether people share your political views but love your work, or whether people don't share your political views and don't like your work. I mean, there's so many variations that you could potentially come at when you are making political work. It's always a risk. And saleability is always a conversation. And I wonder, do you think some of these pieces that are hard topics, do you think that they're saleable, or do you care?
I mean, to be honest, I don't really care, but I think that I'm in a privileged position because I'm an educator. And so I'm able to support myself through teaching. So I have the ability to be like, whatever, if it sells, it sells. But at the same time, like, you know, in the same way that when Frank and I were talking about the Frank Freedom Project in wrestling, which is a pop culture kind of thing, that a lot of people who maybe aren't interested in art are like, ooh, I like wrestling. And then that's an entry point. The aesthetics of my work with high patterning, color, you know, really kind of slick designed objects in some sense. I want them to be part of a kind of consumer language in some sense, because if I can get you to get excited or seduced by it visually, and you're already invested, right? So you're like, ooh, I want to check this and like look at it closer. And then the politics or the sort of really difficult, problematic sort of charged subject matter is revealed once you're already sort of in. So in that sense, because I think about the aesthetics, and I'm a designer as well, I think that in, you know, in some sense they are super sellable, even if the subject matter is really dark. You don't really know that until you investigate it. So until you investigate it closer, they're just sort of really colorful, beautiful little things.
I think, yeah, I don't know if the topic is, or the content is dark. Perhaps maybe it's just it's affronting. And we don't always talk about it. We're not talking about it in relationship to art. You know, a lot of folks like to talk about aesthetics and process and how long did it take you to make this, you know. So you know, in relationship to the market, I wondered, you know, it's not so much you're making these for money, and also you're making it because you want to visually, what I'm hearing, visually communicate some issues that perhaps so, you know, they're very touch and go issues, like, oh yeah, we know this, and then they kind of like fly by the wayside. But I'm so thankful that we have you here now to open up to some questions. We've got a good 15 to 20 minutes left, and I'm wondering if there's anyone in the chat room here that would be interested in asking Johannah some questions about her work or and other things.
Oh. Okay. So one of the questions is the original function of the war rug, like in Afghanistan, and then if I taught myself how to use the tufting gun. The war rugs are traditionally hand-knotted rugs and are used in the way that any traditional rug would be used. So just in your house. The interest for people who made them, for people in their community. The interesting thing about them, though, is that once American kind of textile antique art collectors got hip that war rugs were a thing, which is like in the 90s, then they became this like hot commodity for a Western market to purchase them. So then it became this like insane, messed up sort of loop of like, we are traumatizing their country. And then through that trauma, like these goods have become a thing that are then desired by us as a market. So then they started being made specifically for export to the States in some sense, not all of them. So that has shifted their use, I should say. And as far as teaching myself the tufting gun, so one of my absolute best friends, Helen Ran, who is this absolutely brilliant artist, originally from China, getting her MFA at Hunter right now. So we've been friends, we met at a residency, and we both were really interested in learning about tufting guns and tufting. And so I went on a trip with her and my friend Tony, who's another amazing artist from China, and went to the factory where they actually use they make the tufting guns, and they also make rugs. And we just fell in love with them. And they kind of gave us a tutorial in this factory. They were super generous. And we were all like, we need them, we're buying them, we're taking them right now. And so we ended up each buying one, and then we just posted some images, sort of a side note, posted some images on Instagram and some videos of us playing with them. And all of our artist friends are like, give it to me, I need it. Like, how do I get this tufting gun? So then actually like Helen has been like helping she started a thing called Tuft Love on Instagram. Highly recommend, check out Tuft Love. And so she does tutorials and sort of helps people learn about the guns and imports them and stuff like that. So, yeah. Okay. So I just got a message about the aesthetics of sort of it being super colorful and fun, but then having this dark subject matter. I kind of addressed this a little bit, so sorry if it's redundant, but I use the kind of color and sort of maximalism and design sensibility that's really seductive purposefully to draw people in before they necessarily know about the sort of subject matter. In some sense, I mean, there is, depending on the project, there's an element of satire. I mean, the Frank Freedom Project is obviously really kind of pointed in that way. But then otherwise, I want to draw people in before they're like, oh, I don't agree with these politics, or, oh, I don't know if I want to get involved in thinking about that. You know, like if they're already kind of like, color, you know, like, anyway, so it's sort of strategic.
And I also suppose the juxtaposition of some of the symbols that you're using, in particular in the carpet or the rug that's behind you, the immigration reform, the symbolism is it's not aggressive, right? It not just not in its palette, but the vests of the police, the teddy bears, the places which people were staying, the underpass, like these are all symbols that I suppose together they do create that unfortunate violence that immigrants were experiencing through different, you know, eight or so months ago and still. But I do think that there's a really nice subtlety before you speak about it. You know, if you're not just in there saying straight up, this is how I think and you need to think like me. So I do value that. Laura, it's so nice for you to say that. Oh, good question.
Okay, so talking about sort of calls to action for viewers or ways for people to engage further in the subject matter. So right now, and asking if I ever do fundraisers through sales. Right now, I'm doing specific, I think this is a little bit askew maybe from what this question is indicating, but I'm literally doing a fundraiser for sort of COVID-19 scholarship relief for my nonprofit. So all of the works, I have 6 works up on Artfare right now, all of them are 100% going towards those scholarships. And some of these little paper babies that I'm gonna make will go in there as well through my art auction that I'm doing. I think that it's a really good point as far as how to kind of marry direct action and activism with sort of art objects as something like an object of contemplation to make you think about these things. And I think I'm trying to do that more. And I have kind of plans to try to do that more. So right now I'm applying for some things that if I get it, specifically with these rugs, that I would be doing a residency where the rugs themselves, as they're being produced, would be a kind of substrate on the floor through which I would have programming that would periodically have kind of like roundtable discussions where I bring in, for example, like immigration lawyers, or immigrants' rights activists, or prison abolition activists, people who are like on the ground working within these different subject matters, and use them to host these kind of discussions. And again, if they're coming from different NGOs, I think that it makes sense to do some sort of fundraiser or a way for someone to, financially give back. What I think would be cool about these is that we would literally have the rugs on the floors, and for this different programming where we're talking to people on the ground in these issues, to kind of sit down and kind of sit around and have it as a democratizing kind of structure to discuss these issues. And then part of that, what I also wanted to do is to have a kind of frame where it's a communal rug. So after we're having these different discussions with, again, I want to try to invite activists, lawyers, advocates, that we would all kind of collaborate on a rug that would be like your takeaway from the discussion. So like little doodles almost, or their words, that then would act as kind of a living archive of the kind of community conversation around the subject matter. But yeah, so I want to try to do more direct stuff with the exhibition.
Someone was asking on Instagram Live, would you please explain Walmart's role with the temporary concentration camp?
So I know of at least one. My research is failing me a little bit how many of these, but they repurposed super Walmarts for detention centers because they're huge, I guess, and it makes a good kind of vessel. So that's a documented thing. But I think I specifically, so many of these repurposed spaces for, I think you're right, concentration camp situation. I think we should talk about them in that framework. But I feel like the Walmart to me was just particularly just blew my mind because of its kind of relationship with consumerism. And I always think about how, if we're talking about professional wrestling and ideology and these sort of ways of dazzling and distracting crowds through, desire and consumerism and media, Walmart to me is the epicenter of that, right? Of these cheap goods that sort of blind us into maybe not being aware of things as we would. I don't know, and that happens with all consumerism, but I feel because Walmart's such a big corporation. So when I found that out, I was like, oh, Walmart has got to go in this.
What if you could quickly explain the mural that you did that was, I think, downtown with the currency, and if you could explain really quickly, because there was a question that could also be part of this, answer, addressing this, how you engage your audience and the QR code.
Yeah, I feel like we have to keep that as a secret between all of us. Yeah, so
sorry.
All right, well, we'll just talk about it.
It was subtle.
It's still up. That's why I'm cagey talking about it. So that was a piece that I did where
it's up at J Street Metro Tech.
I don't know if I should talk about it.
Well, maybe just talk about what the mural is fundamentally, why you were commissioned.
Yeah, the reason that I'm being cagey is because my political beliefs do not necessarily align with the building that commissioned the work. And so the way that I've chosen to engage with the politics in that work have been on the subversive side. And so, the piece itself is a vinyl installation. So it's sort of vinyl covering the walls. It was in a building downtown that was like over 2,000 square feet on like all of these walls. Now it's a J Street Metro Tech. But it's super colorful patterning that it just looks like kind of pretty wallpaper, but like really intense, relatively maximalist wallpaper. And but all of the patterning elements are taken from currency motifs from around the world. And there's specific country. I don't know how much I should talk about it.
Once upon a time, we'll just have to follow.
Yeah, and there's Easter eggs in the form of QR codes that are part of the patterns.
That's enough. That's wonderful. Catherine, hi Catherine, had a question, and so does John there. And
oh yeah. Okay, so wait, the first one. Oh, hi Catherine. Oh, hi. Okay, so talk about. Can you talk about this idea, even if it's not very large? Like, Catherine, do you mean like the time, like this current moment? I think I don't understand your question. Hi.
Hey. Yeah, I was just wondering if, because we're talking a lot about communities, if well, even just doing this, you were saying, I think you're doing a great job, A, and B, yeah, just like a different way of engaging people or like thinking about your work. Has it changed at all? Obviously, you're very responsive to what's going on politically. So I was just wondering what you're thinking about in this climate.
Yeah, I think that I'm thinking about ways to make a more direct connection between what I'm talking about and people who are working, like I'm working on the ground with human trafficking through my nonprofit, right? But it's a specific community in Thailand, and it's a specific kind of issue, right? We have human trafficking everywhere. And then these other sort of projects I'm doing it's a kind of constellation of different violences that make up our American landscape. So I think I'm thinking more directly on how I've changed my goal for the work to try to think about ways of making more direct connections, where I do my work because I'm an artist and I like to make things, and this is my way of engaging with the world and these topics, but then have them kind of tied to programming that in some way gets in touch and gets other people in touch with people who are doing the work directly. Does that make sense? But I hadn't really thought about doing that before this year. I feel like that's a new thing where I was kind of, and I think it's because I'm seeing a lot of really amazing arts organizations that have really robust programming. That's like, I kind of see people doing this stuff. I see it through Elijah Wheat Showroom. I see it like Gloria's does a lot of amazing programming, like Recess's programming, and so I started seeing this and I was like, oh, that's like totally a way that I can like engage with stuff, like especially artist run space, like Paradise Palace is a really cool program, so there's like, now I'm like, oh, that could be possible in a way I hadn't thought about before.
I think there's one more question for you, and then we're almost out of time.
So talking about like the ethical sourcing of rug materials, like what countries they're from, and like how I think about that in terms of the production of the piece. It's a really tough one. I mean, you might not like this answer, but I don't really think it's possible to live ethically within global capitalism. So I think we can try, but I also think that like, it's really difficult to 100% say, oh, I'm sourcing materials and they're like not impacting anyone negatively. I actually don't even know if there is such a material. You know, you can be a vegan and almonds are like killing the ecosystem, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and all your almond milk is just like counteracting all the cow farts that you're preventing. So I don't know. So I would say, like, I haven't, when I'm sourcing it's acrylic yarn and wool yarn for the rugs. So I can't really say that it comes from an ethically sourced place, because I also, like, these rugs are extremely expensive to produce. And so for me, just trying to produce them, like, economics also comes into it. Like, I would love to be able to be like, oh, I'm going to an organic farm where, you know, the cow named Moses, or the sheep named Moses, I could see him and I've seen his wool and it's hand dyed. You know, I would love to do that, but I can't actually afford to do that. So, like, do I think the acrylic yarn that I'm using is probably unethically made? It's mass produced and it has plastic in it. So yeah, but I think it's a really good point. And it's something that I think about, but I haven't really been able to resolve, to be honest. But yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's as capitalists living in a consumer-driven society, as makers that produce a lot of stuff that we want folks to consume. I suppose the hypocrisy is, it is all around us, and yet, you know, to continually address our fortunate ability to, you know, fight all the isms or engage in anti-racism, anti-sexism, you know, homophobia, and otherwise, you know, that's the gift that we have with the amount of leverage we have as capitalists growing up with, blah, blah, blah. So I am really so pleased to have you on this platform right now, Thursday nights, at 6 p.m. Artfare is going to be hosting these studio visits and some gallery tours. Is there anything else that you'd like to say while we close up shop here?
Well, just a thank you to you for, you know, asking really amazing questions and facilitating this. And to Artfare, I think it's an amazing platform, and I'm really excited to have some of my work up there and be able to kind of connect with new people, collectors or other artists or whoever through the platform. Again, the stuff I have up, 100% of proceeds are going to my scholarship fund, so check it out. And then also just thank you for everyone for tuning in. Like, I'm just really amazed that you want to see what I'm doing. So thanks for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and you know, creative solution to, I know some folks would really love to get into your studio and see these precious beauties up close and personal, and pretty soon you'll be able to, you just have to ask for a studio visit on Artfare. I know, it's so cool. But next Thursday, everyone, thanks again for being here. Next Thursday, we're going to be talking to Alex Judson, a contemporary photographer who's also on the platform, and we'll be in his studio asking him the tough COVID questions. Rock and roll, everyone. Thanks. And for those who came in late or missed some of this, we're recording this right now. We're going to post it up on our YouTube, Artfare YouTube channel, as soon as we're done downloading it and all that good stuff. So stay tuned, stay strong, stay healthy, and peace.
You want to sign up, say thanks, Frank?
Goodbye.
Thanks for doing the IG hard work.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Love it. Cool.